I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the motion alert on my phone at 6:30 in the morning on a freezing Tuesday in January. I was sitting in my home office in Boulder, Colorado, nursing my first cup of coffee and trying to wake up enough to start my workday when the notification from my security camera system lit up my screen. What I saw made me do a double take so hard, I nearly spilled coffee all over my keyboard. There she was, Patricia Hendricks, the president of our Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association, actively climbing over my 6-foot wooden fence gate like some kind of deranged burglar. Her sensible beige pantsuit was getting caught on the top of the gate, and her perfectly coiffed blonde bob was coming undone as she struggled to maintain her balance. I watched in real time as she finally managed to get one leg over, then the other, before dropping down into my side yard with all the grace of a sack of potatoes. I sat there frozen, watching through the camera feed as she straightened her clothes, looked around furtively like she was checking if anyone had seen her, and then marched directly to the corner of my garage where I kept my outdoor supplies. Without any hesitation whatsoever, she grabbed 3 bottles of my de-icer solution that I had just purchased 2 days ago from Home Depot. Each bottle had cost me almost $20 because Colorado winters are brutal and quality de-icer does not come cheap. My name is Vincent Dalton, and I had lived in this particular neighborhood for 5 years. I work from home as a software developer, which means I am usually here to witness all the neighborhood drama firsthand, though nothing quite like this had ever happened before. The house itself was a modest 3-bedroom ranch-style home with a decent-sized yard. Nothing fancy but perfect for a single guy who valued his privacy and independence. Patricia Hendricks had been the HOA president for the last 3 years, and in that time, she had made it her personal mission to make everyone's life in our neighborhood absolutely miserable. She was one of those middle-aged women who seemed to have nothing better to do than patrol the streets looking for violations, real or imagined. Her husband apparently traveled for work constantly, which left her with endless free time to dedicate to being the neighborhood's most insufferable busybody. I grabbed my phone and immediately saved the footage to my cloud storage, then made a backup on my computer. My hands were actually shaking slightly from the sheer audacity of what I had just witnessed. This woman, who constantly sent violation notices for the most ridiculous infractions, had just committed actual theft and trespassing on camera. The irony was not lost on me. Just last month, Patricia had sent me a certified letter demanding I repaint my mailbox because the white paint had a slightly yellowish tint that was apparently not in compliance with the neighborhood standards. Never mind that the mailbox was 15 years old and weathering was natural. I had ignored the letter because I had checked the actual HOA bylaws, and nowhere did it specify the exact shade of white required for mailboxes. She had been furious. Before that, she had threatened to fine me $200 because my trash bins were visible from the street for approximately 30 minutes past the designated time on collection day. I had been in an online meeting that ran late, and I did not get them put away immediately. 30 minutes. She had apparently been driving around with a timer. Now here she was, stealing my property on camera. I watched the rest of the footage as Patricia tucked 2 bottles under one arm and carried the third in her hand, then proceeded to climb back over my gate with considerably more difficulty than she had coming in. The bottles made it awkward, and at one point, she nearly dropped one. Part of me wished she had, just for the comedic value. Finally, she made it over and disappeared from the camera's view. I sat back in my chair and thought about my options. I could confront her directly, but knowing Patricia, She would just deny everything and probably try to turn it around on me somehow. I could file a police report, but would the police really care about $60 worth of de-icer? Maybe, maybe not. The trespassing was technically the bigger issue, but still. Then I thought about all the times Patricia had made my life difficult over the past few years. The mailbox incident, the trash bin incident, the time she had tried to fine me for having my car parked in my own driveway for more than 48 consecutive hours, because apparently vehicles needed to be stored in garages, according to some obscure bylaw she had dug up. The time she had complained about the color of my front door wreath during Christmas, because it had blue ornaments in addition to the traditional red and green, and she claimed blue was not a Christmas color. I opened my laptop and pulled up the security footage again, this time on the larger screen. The quality was excellent. I had invested in a good camera system specifically because of the high package theft rates in our area, and it had paid off. You could clearly see Patricia's face. You could clearly see her climbing over the gate. You could clearly see her taking my property. The timestamp was visible. Everything was documented perfectly. An idea started forming in my mind. I had a friend named Derek who worked in social media marketing, and he had told me more than once that Ring camera videos and other home security footage often went viral when they showed particularly egregious behavior. People loved neighborhood drama, especially when it involved hypocritical HOA board members. But I am not an impulsive person. I decided to sit on the footage for a bit and see what happened next. Maybe Patricia would realize what she had done and return the de-icer with an apology. Maybe she would at least have the decency to feel guilty about it. I did not really believe either of those things would happen, but I wanted to give her a chance. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept wandering back to the footage. Around lunchtime, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to clear my head. The weather was cold, probably about 25 degrees, and the sidewalks were covered in ice in spots. I passed by Patricia's house, which was 4 doors down from mine on the same street. Her house was a larger colonial style with pretentious white columns on the front porch. Everything about it screamed that she cared way too much about appearances. As I walked past, I noticed that her driveway and front walkway were completely clear of ice, not a single slippery spot. I stopped and stared for a moment, and then I saw it. 3 bottles sitting on her front porch right next to her door. My bottles. My de-icer. She had not even had the sense to hide them. The audacity of this woman was truly breathtaking. She had stolen my de-icer, used it on her own property, and left the evidence in plain sight. It was almost like she did not think there would be any consequences for her actions because she was the HOA president, and therefore above the rules that applied to everyone else. I took out my phone and snapped a few photos of the bottles on her porch, making sure to get her house number in the frame. Then I continued my walk, my decision solidifying with each step. Patricia Hendricks had been a tyrant for long enough. It was time for her to face some accountability. When I got home, I did some research. I looked up Colorado laws regarding theft and trespassing. Theft of property valued under $1,000 was typically classified as petty theft, a misdemeanor. Trespassing was also a misdemeanor. Neither were serious enough to likely result in jail time, especially for a first offense, but they were still crimes. She could face fines, community service, and it would go on her record. More importantly, I looked up information about Patricia's job. I had heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she worked as some kind of compliance officer for a financial services company in Denver. I did not know the exact company, but I knew the general industry. I also knew that jobs in financial compliance typically required background checks and had strict codes of conduct. A criminal conviction, even a misdemeanor, could definitely impact her employment. Then I started thinking about the viral video angle again. I called my friend Derek. "Hey man, what's up?" he answered on the second ring. "I need your advice on something," I said. "Hypothetically, if I had video footage of my HOA president committing a crime and I wanted to share it online, what would be the best way to do that?" There was a pause. "Hypothetically." "Okay, not hypothetically, I actually have the footage." "Dude, what did she do?" I explained the whole situation to him. The climbing over the gate, the stealing of the de-icer, the years of harassment over petty violations. Derek listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he let out a low whistle. "That's insane," he said. "And you have it all on camera, crystal clear footage. You can see her face, see her taking the stuff, everything." "Well, if you want it to go viral, Twitter is probably your best bet. Short video clips do really well there. You could also post it on TikTok, Reddit, Facebook, basically everywhere. The more platforms, the better chance of it taking off. But here's the thing, Vincent. Once you post it, you cannot take it back. It will be out there forever." "Are you sure you want to do this?" I thought about it for a moment. "Yeah, I am sure. She has had this coming for a long time." "All right then. Edit the video down to about a minute or two, get all the good parts in there. Make sure the quality is good. Write a caption that explains what's happening, but keep it short and punchy. Hashtags are your friend, and timing matters. Post it in the evening when people are browsing online after work. That's when you will get the most engagement." "Thanks, Derek, I appreciate it." "No problem. Send me the link once you post it. I will share it to help it get traction." I spent the next few hours editing the footage. I cut it down to about 90 seconds, showing Patricia climbing over the gate, taking the de-icer and climbing back out. I added timestamps and labels to make it clear what was happening. I also included a brief text overlay at the beginning explaining that this was my HOA president, who had sent me countless violation notices for minor infractions. And now here, she was committing actual theft and trespassing. The video looked good. Professional enough to be credible, but not so polished that it looked fake. I created accounts on several platforms under a username that did not directly identify me, though I knew people in the neighborhood would probably figure it out quickly enough. At 7 o'clock that evening, I posted the video with the caption, "HOA president climbed my fence and stole my de-icer after sending me violation notices for having a slightly yellowed mailbox. The hypocrisy is unreal." I added hashtags like HOA stories, Karen got caught on camera, and several others that Derek had suggested. Then I waited. For the first hour, nothing much happened. The video got a few views, a couple of likes, one share. I started to think maybe it was not going to take off after all. But then around 8:30, something shifted. The views started climbing rapidly. 10 views became 50, became 200, became 1,000. People were sharing it, commenting, quoting the tweet with their own HOA horror stories. By 10 o'clock that night, the video had over 50,000 views. By midnight, it was at 200,000. I could barely keep up with the notifications. People were tagging local news stations, tagging HOA reform groups, tagging lawyers who specialized in HOA disputes. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive. People were calling Patricia out, sharing their own stories about nightmare HOA board members, discussing the broader problems with HOA culture in America. A few people were asking for updates, wanting to know if I had reported her to the police or if she had faced any consequences yet. I did not sleep much that night. I kept refreshing the various platforms, watching the view counts climb higher and higher. By morning, the video had over 2 million views on Twitter alone. It had been picked up by several of those viral content aggregator accounts with millions of followers. It was on Reddit's front page. It was all over TikTok. Local news stations in Colorado were reaching out to me for interviews. My phone started ringing at 7 in the morning. I did not recognize the number, so I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. Different number. Another voicemail. I checked the messages. They were from reporters wanting comments, wanting to interview me, wanting the full story. I decided to ignore most of them for now. I wanted to see how this played out a bit more before I started doing media interviews. At 8:30, there was a loud banging on my front door. I looked through the peephole and saw Patricia standing there, her face red and furious. She was pounding on the door hard enough that I worried she might damage it. I opened the door but left the screen door closed and locked between us. "How dare you?" she shrieked immediately. "How dare you post that video? Do you have any idea what you have done?" "Good morning, Patricia," I said calmly. "Is there something I can help you with? That video is defamation. It is slander. I am going to sue you for everything you have got." "Actually, it would be libel, not slander, since it is a video," I corrected her. "But it is not libel either, since everything in the video is true and documented. You did climb over my gate. You did take my property without permission. That's called theft. You did trespass on my property. Those are both crimes, Patricia. I needed that de-icer for safety reasons. My walkway was icy and dangerous. I could have fallen and hurt myself. So instead of going to a store like a normal person, you decided to steal mine. I was going to replace it," she sputtered. "I was going to buy you new bottles today." "That's interesting because that's not what people typically do when they borrow things. Usually they ask first, and they do not have to climb over fences to get them. You are being ridiculous. This is a neighborhood. We are supposed to help each other out. Help each other out. Patricia, you have sent me more violation notices than I can count over the past few years. You threatened to fine me for having my trash cans out 30 minutes too long. You demanded I repaint my mailbox. You have made my life difficult at every opportunity. And now you want to talk about neighborhood cooperation." She seemed to realize that angle was not working. Her expression shifted from indignant to calculating. "If you take down that video right now, we can forget this whole thing happened. I will stop sending you violation notices. Clean slate. It has already been viewed over 2 million times. Taking it down now would not accomplish anything." Her face went pale. 2 million, as of about an hour ago, yes, it is probably more by now. You need to fix this. Contact the platforms, get them to remove it. Tell people it was a misunderstanding. But it was not a misunderstanding. You stole my property. On camera. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her mind working, trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. Finally, she said, "My employer is going to see this." "Probably, yes. I could lose my job. That's possible. You are ruining my life over $60 worth of de-icer." "No, Patricia. You potentially ruined your own life by committing theft and trespassing. I just documented it. Maybe if you had not spent the last few years harassing everyone in this neighborhood over trivial violations, people would be more sympathetic. But you established a standard of zero tolerance for rule breaking. I am just holding you to that same standard." She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. After a moment, she turned and walked away, her shoulders stiff with rage. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. That confrontation had been more intense than I expected, but I was glad I had stood my ground. Over the next few days, things escalated rapidly. The video continued to spread across the internet. It ended up on the local news in Denver and Colorado Springs. A reporter from one of the Denver stations came to my house and asked if I wanted to do an on-camera interview. I agreed, figuring I might as well tell my side of the story publicly. The interview aired that evening. I explained the years of harassment from Patricia, the petty violation notices, the general culture of fear and overreach that she had created in the neighborhood. I also made it clear that while I found the situation somewhat amusing, I was serious about wanting accountability. I confirmed that I had filed a police report for theft and trespassing. That last part was not entirely true when I did the interview, but I figured I should probably actually file one given how public everything had become. The next morning, I went to the Boulder Police Department and filed an official report. The officer who took my statement seemed amused by the whole situation. "We have been getting a lot of calls about this," he said. "The video is everywhere. I will be honest with you, Mr. Dalton. These kinds of cases do not usually result in serious consequences. It is a small amount of property first offense, presumably, but we will investigate and pass it on to the district attorney's office. They will decide whether to press charges." "I understand. I just want it on record. Smart move, especially given the publicity, covers your bases." I left the police station feeling like I had done what I needed to do. The legal process would take its course, whatever that meant. Meanwhile, the internet had completely turned against Patricia. People were digging into her background, finding out where she worked. Someone found her LinkedIn profile and started sharing it. Her employer, a company called Cascade Financial Services, started getting flooded with messages and calls about the video. I felt a little bit guilty about that part. I had not wanted to specifically target her employment, but I also knew that public scrutiny was an inevitable consequence of going viral. There was no putting the genie back in the bottle. 3 days after the video was posted, I saw a news article with the headline, "HOA President Fired After Viral Video Shows Her Stealing from Neighbor." My stomach did a little flip when I read it. I clicked through and read the full article. Cascade Financial Services had released a statement saying that Patricia Hendricks was no longer employed with the company. The statement mentioned that employees were expected to uphold the highest standards of ethical conduct and integrity, and that actions inconsistent with those values would not be tolerated. It was corporate speak, but the message was clear. She had been fired. The article also mentioned that the Boulder District Attorney's Office was reviewing the case for potential charges. I sat there staring at my computer screen, processing this information. Part of me felt vindicated. Patricia had spent years making people miserable, and now she was facing real consequences for her actions. But another part of me felt a twinge of concern. Had I gone too far? Was I responsible for destroying this woman's career over a relatively minor theft? I called Derek to talk it through. "Dude, you are all over the news," he said when he picked up. "This thing got way bigger than I expected." "She got fired," I said. "Yeah, I saw that. How do you feel about it?" "Honestly, I am not sure. I mean, she deserved consequences, but I did not necessarily set out to get her fired." "Vincent, listen to me. You documented a crime that she committed. You shared that documentation publicly. Everything that happened after that is a result of her own actions, not yours. She is the one who chose to steal from you. She is the one who chose to trespass. She is the one who spent years abusing her position as HOA president to harass people. You just held up a mirror. I know you are right. It just feels like a lot. It is a lot. But sometimes people need to face real consequences for their behavior. Otherwise, they just keep doing it." We talked for a while longer, and I felt a bit better by the end of the conversation. Derek was right. I had not made Patricia climb over my fence. I had not made her steal my property. I had simply documented what happened and shared it. The rest was on her. Over the next week, more developments unfolded. The Boulder District Attorney's Office announced that they were filing misdemeanor charges against Patricia for theft and trespassing. The court date was set for 2 months out. The charges carried potential penalties of up to $1,000 in fines and up to 6 months in jail, though jail time was extremely unlikely for a first offense of this nature. Patricia hired a lawyer, some expensive attorney from Denver who specialized in white-collar crime. The lawyer released a statement saying that Patricia deeply regretted her actions, that she had been under extreme stress, and that she intended to take full responsibility and make restitution. The statement rang hollow to me. Patricia did not regret her actions. She regretted getting caught. Meanwhile, the fallout in our neighborhood was significant. An emergency HOA meeting was called, and Patricia was voted out as president by a nearly unanimous vote. Only 2 people voted to keep her, presumably friends of hers. A new board was elected, with more reasonable people who actually wanted to serve the community rather than rule over it with an iron fist. The new board president was a guy named Mike Chen who lived 2 streets over. He was a retired engineer, calm and pragmatic. One of his first acts was to review all the existing violation notices and fines that Patricia had issued over the past year. He ended up dismissing about 40% of them as either too petty to enforce or not actually supported by the HOA bylaws. My mailbox violation was one of the ones dismissed. So was the trash can incident. So were dozens of other ridiculous complaints Patricia had filed against various neighbors. People in the neighborhood started talking to me more. Before, I had been friendly with my immediate neighbors, but had not really connected with many others. Now, people would stop me on walks to thank me for standing up to Patricia. They shared their own horror stories about her reign as HOA president. One woman, Margaret, who lived 3 doors down from Patricia, told me that Patricia had tried to fine her $200 for planting flowers in her front yard that were not on the approved species list. The approved list, it turned out, did not actually exist in the HOA bylaws. Patricia had just made it up. Another neighbor, Tom, said Patricia had threatened to put a lien on his house because his grass was allegedly 2 inches taller than the maximum allowed height. Tom had actually measured his grass with a ruler and found it was within compliance, but Patricia would not back down until he hired a landscaping company to provide written documentation of the grass height. The stories went on and on. It became clear that Patricia had been terrorizing the neighborhood for years, and everyone was relieved that she was finally out of power. About 3 weeks after the video went viral, I got a call from a producer at a national morning show. They wanted to do a segment about HOA overreach and asked if I would be willing to appear on the show to discuss my experience. They also wanted to invite someone from a HOA reform advocacy group to talk about the broader issues. I thought about it for a day and then agreed. The segment was filmed remotely, with me appearing via video call from my home office. The hosts were sympathetic and asked good questions. I talked about the specific incident with Patricia, but I also tried to broaden the conversation to discuss the systemic problems with HOA governance in many communities across America. The advocacy group representative talked about how HOAs often attract the wrong kind of people to leadership positions. People who are more interested in power and control than in serving their communities. She discussed the lack of oversight and accountability in many HOA systems, and how homeowners often have very little recourse when board members abuse their authority. The segment was well received. It aired on a Thursday morning and generated even more discussion online. Several state legislators in Colorado reached out to say they were considering reforms to HOA governance laws in response to the publicity around my case. I was amazed at how one video had sparked such a broad conversation. It had gone far beyond just my personal situation with Patricia. People were talking about HOA reform in states across the country. Homeowners who had suffered under abusive HOA boards were speaking up and sharing their stories. There was a real sense that maybe something positive could come out of all this. 2 months after the initial incident, Patricia's court date arrived. I had to appear as a witness since I was the victim in the case. I drove to the Boulder County Courthouse on a cold March morning, feeling nervous despite the fact that I was not the one on trial. The courtroom was surprisingly full. Several reporters were there, along with some curious members of the public who had followed the story. I spotted a few of my neighbors in the gallery as well. Patricia arrived with her lawyer. She looked different than I remembered, thinner, older somehow. The stress of the past 2 months had clearly taken a toll. She did not look at me as she took her seat at the defense table. The proceedings were relatively straightforward. The prosecutor presented the video evidence, which spoke for itself. Patricia's lawyer did not contest the facts of the case. Instead, he focused on arguing for leniency in sentencing, emphasizing that this was a first offense, that Patricia had already suffered significant consequences through job loss and public humiliation, and that she was genuinely remorseful. Patricia herself gave a brief statement. Her voice shook as she spoke. "Your Honor, I know what I did was wrong. I have no excuse for my behavior. I was stressed and not thinking clearly, but that does not justify my actions. I am deeply sorry for what I did to Mr. Dalton, and I am prepared to accept whatever punishment the court deems appropriate." It sounded rehearsed, but I suppose that was to be expected. Her lawyer had probably written it for her. The judge, an older woman named Judge Martinez, listened carefully to all the arguments. Then she announced her decision. "Miss Hendricks, you have pleaded guilty to misdemeanor theft and trespassing. The court recognizes that you have already faced significant consequences for your actions. However, that does not absolve you of criminal responsibility. You violated Mr. Dalton's property rights and took something that did not belong to you. That behavior cannot be excused." She paused, looking at Patricia over her glasses. "That being said, the court also recognizes that this is your first offense, and that the value of the property taken was relatively small. Therefore, I am sentencing you to 1 year of supervised probation, 80 hours of community service, and restitution to Mr. Dalton in the amount of $60 for the stolen property, plus $500 to cover his time and expenses related to this matter. You will also be required to attend a theft prevention program. Do you understand these terms?" "Yes, Your Honor," Patricia said quietly. "Let me be clear, Miss Hendricks. If you violate the terms of your probation in any way, you will face additional penalties, potentially including jail time. Use this as an opportunity to reflect on your choices and make better decisions going forward. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down, and it was over. Patricia and her lawyer stood and quickly left the courtroom through a side door, avoiding the reporters who tried to approach them. The prosecutor came over to shake my hand. "Good outcome," he said. "She will think twice before doing something like this again." "I appreciate you taking the case seriously," I told him. "Are you kidding? This was the easiest case I have had in months. The evidence was airtight. Thank you for having good security cameras." I left the courthouse feeling a sense of closure. Justice had been served, not in some dramatic television way, but in the mundane, bureaucratic way that the real legal system actually works. Patricia had been held accountable. She had a criminal record now. She had to do community service and pay restitution. It was not earth-shattering, but it was something. Over the next few weeks, things slowly returned to normal. The video was still out there on the internet, racking up views, but the immediate frenzy of media attention had died down. I declined most interview requests at that point, feeling like I had said everything I needed to say. Patricia moved out of the neighborhood about a month after her court date. I heard through the grapevine that she and her husband were getting divorced, though I did not know if that was related to the incident or if there were other issues in their marriage. Her house went up for sale, and it sold quickly. I never saw her again. The new HOA board under Mike Chen's leadership turned out to be excellent. They focused on actual community improvement rather than petty enforcement. They organized neighborhood events, improved common areas, and only sent violation notices for things that were genuinely problematic, like seriously overgrown yards that were becoming fire hazards or structural issues that affected property values. The change in atmosphere was remarkable. People actually seemed to enjoy living in the neighborhood again. The constant anxiety about receiving violation notices was gone. Neighbors were friendlier to each other, no longer afraid that casual conversations might lead to reports to the HOA board. I became somewhat friendly with Mike Chen. We would occasionally grab coffee and talk about neighborhood issues. He told me that cleaning up Patricia's mess had been a bigger job than he expected. She had files on everyone, he said one morning as we sat in a local coffee shop. Like detailed files. She would drive around the neighborhood taking photos, documenting every tiny thing she thought was a violation. She had hundreds of photos going back years. It was obsessive. That is actually kind of disturbing, I said. It was. We ended up shredding most of it. There was no reason to keep that kind of surveillance documentation. It is not what an HOA is supposed to be about. What is an HOA supposed to be about? He thought about it for a moment. Maintaining property values and community standards, sure, but also just helping neighbors work together to make the neighborhood a nice place to live. It should not be about control and punishment. Patricia lost sight of that if she ever understood it in the first place. I nodded. I am glad you are in charge now. You have done a great job. Thanks. And hey, thank you for what you did. I know it got messy, but someone needed to stand up to her. She was out of control. The video eventually stopped gaining views at quite the viral pace it had initially, but it never really disappeared. Every few months, I would notice a spike in views as it got shared again by some new audience. It became one of those internet classics, a go-to example of HOA horror stories. I did a few more interviews over the following year, mostly for podcasts or YouTube channels focused on HOA issues or property rights. I tried to use the platform to advocate for meaningful reforms to HOA governance structures. Some states actually did pass new laws creating more oversight and making it easier for homeowners to challenge board decisions. My life eventually returned to a version of normal, though I was now semi-internet famous in a very niche way. People who were into HOA drama knew my story. I even got recognized once in a Home Depot when I was buying, ironically enough, more de-icer. "Hey, are you the guy from that video?" A middle-aged man asked me in the cleaning supplies aisle. Yeah, that's me," I admitted. "Dude, that was awesome." I live in an HOA in Aurora and our board is just like that lady. Total control freaks. Your video inspired me to run for the board myself. I got elected last month. "That's great," I said, genuinely pleased. "Good luck with it." "Thanks, man." "And hey, guard that de-icer with your life," he added with a grin. I laughed. It was nice to know that something positive had come from the whole ordeal. About a year and a half after the original incident, I was working in my home office when I got an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line was "Apology from Patricia Hendricks." I stared at it for a moment before deciding to open it. The email was long, several paragraphs. Patricia explained that she had been going through therapy since the incident and had come to understand how her behavior as HOA president had been controlling and harmful. She apologized not just for stealing from me, but for all the petty harassment over the years. She said she had been dealing with personal issues, including problems in her marriage and anxiety about her own sense of purpose and worth, and that she had channeled those issues into an unhealthy need for control over the neighborhood. She wrote that losing her job and facing criminal charges had been devastating at the time, but that it had ultimately forced her to confront her behavior and get help. She was working as a bookkeeper now, a less prestigious job but one that she found less stressful. She and her ex-husband had finalized their divorce, and she had moved to Fort Collins to start fresh. She was not asking for forgiveness, she wrote, just wanted me to know that she understood the impact of her actions and was working to be a better person. I read the email 3 times, trying to gauge how sincere it was. It certainly sounded more genuine than her courtroom apology had. There were specific details and acknowledgments that suggested real self-reflection. I did not respond immediately. I sat with it for a few days, thinking about how I felt. Eventually, I wrote back a brief reply. "Patricia, I appreciate you reaching out and taking accountability for your actions. What you did caused a lot of problems, but I am glad to hear you are working on yourself. I hope things go better for you in Fort Collins. Best wishes, Vincent." It was not a warm response, but it was honest. I was not ready to be friends with her or anything like that, but I could acknowledge her attempt at making amends. She wrote back one more time, just a short note thanking me for responding and wishing me well. After that, we never communicated again. Life continued. The seasons changed. Winter gave way to spring, spring to summer. My house needed some repairs, so I contracted with a local handyman to fix a few things. We ended up becoming friends, and he introduced me to his sister, a woman named Tessa Brooks who worked as a teacher in Boulder. We started dating, and things got serious pretty quickly. Tessa thought the whole HOA video saga was hilarious. She had actually seen the video before we met, though she did not realize I was the person in the story until I told her. "Wait, that was you," she said when I mentioned it on our 3rd date. "That video was everywhere. My entire staff room was talking about it at school." "Yeah, that was me. Is that weird?" "Are you kidding? That is amazing. That woman was the worst. I showed that video to my students when we were doing a unit on ethics and consequences." "Well, the high school students, not the little kids." "You used my video as a teaching tool." "Absolutely. It is a perfect example of how actions have consequences and how abuse of power eventually catches up to people. The students loved it." It was strange to think of my personal experience being used in classrooms, but I was glad it had some educational value. Tessa moved into my house about 6 months after we started dating. She loved the neighborhood, especially under the new HOA leadership. We hosted a block party in our yard that summer, and about 30 neighbors showed up. It was a great time, everyone relaxed and friendly. I could not imagine something like that happening under Patricia's reign. Mike Chen gave a short toast at the party. "Here's to Vincent, for having the courage to stand up for what was right, and here's to all of us, for building a real community instead of just following rules. Cheers." Everyone raised their glasses and cheered. I felt genuinely grateful to be part of this neighborhood, something I had not felt in years. 2 years after the original incident, I got a call from a documentary filmmaker. She was making a documentary about HOA culture in America and wanted to feature my story as one of several case studies. I agreed, figuring it would be a good way to contribute to the ongoing conversation about HOA reform. The filming took place over several days. They interviewed me, interviewed several of my neighbors, interviewed Mike Chen, and even got some comments from the prosecutor who had handled Patricia's case. They did not interview Patricia herself. She had declined to participate, but they included the relevant court documents and public records. The documentary came out about a year later and was well received. It premiered at a film festival and then got picked up by a streaming service. My segment was maybe 15 minutes of the total runtime, but it effectively told the story of what had happened and connected it to the broader themes the film was exploring. Watching myself in the documentary was surreal. They had used the original security footage, of course, and seeing Patricia climb over that fence again after all this time still made me shake my head in disbelief. The audacity of it never got old. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. I continued my work as a software developer. Tessa and I got married in a small ceremony in our backyard, with many of our neighbors in attendance. We talked about starting a family. The neighborhood remained peaceful under competent HOA leadership. Sometimes I would think about that cold January morning, when I saw the motion alert on my phone. How I could never have predicted how that one moment would spiral out into viral fame, criminal charges, job loss, divorce, documentary features, and ultimately a complete transformation of our neighborhood culture. It all started with 3 bottles of de-icer, and a woman who thought she was above the rules she enforced so strictly on everyone else. In the end, the surveillance camera I had installed to prevent package theft had captured something far more significant. A perfect illustration of how power corrupts and how accountability, when it finally arrives, can change everything. I never regretted posting that video. Sure, the consequences for Patricia had been severe, but they had also been earned. She had spent years making people's lives miserable over trivial matters, and when she faced real consequences for actual wrongdoing, she could not handle it. That was not my fault. That was a natural result of her own choices and behavior. The story did eventually fade from public consciousness, as all viral moments eventually do. New scandals and new videos took its place in the internet's endless cycle of content. But within the world of HOA reform advocacy, my video remained a touchstone, a go-to example of everything wrong with HOA governance when the wrong people get into positions of power. I occasionally got emails from people in other states, other neighborhoods, dealing with their own versions of Patricia Hendricks. They would ask for advice on how to handle abusive HOA board members. I always told them the same thing. Document everything, know your rights, read your actual HOA bylaws rather than accepting board interpretations, and do not be afraid to stand up for yourself. Most importantly, I would tell them to get involved in HOA governance themselves. The reason people like Patricia end up in charge is because most homeowners do not want to deal with the hassle of serving on the board. But if good people do not step up, the Patricias of the world will fill that vacuum. Mike Chen's term as HOA president eventually ended, and he was replaced by another reasonable person, a woman named Sandra who worked as a project manager for a tech company. The culture of reasonable, community-focused governance continued. Our neighborhood became known in the broader Boulder area as one of the good HOAs, one that actually worked for its residents rather than against them. I sometimes wondered what Patricia was doing in Fort Collins. I hoped she had genuinely changed, that the therapy and consequences had led to real growth. But I also knew that was not really my concern. I had done what I needed to do to protect myself and hold her accountable. What she did with that lesson was up to her. The de-icer itself, those 3 bottles that started everything, had long since been used up or thrown away. I bought new bottles every winter, and I always made sure they were stored securely in my garage rather than outside where they could be easily stolen. I also upgraded my security camera system, adding more cameras with even better resolution. I joked with Tessa that I was preparing for the next viral moment, though I sincerely hoped there would not be one. Our lives moved forward. We had our first child, a daughter we named Emma, 3 years after the original incident. The neighborhood threw us a baby shower, organized by the HOA but in a genuinely supportive way rather than an obligatory one. It was touching to see how far things had come. I showed Emma the video when she was old enough to understand it, maybe 7 or 8 years old. She thought it was hilarious that Daddy was famous on the internet for catching a thief. She did not fully grasp the complexities of the situation, the abuse of power and the karma and all that, but she understood that someone had done something wrong and faced consequences. "Did the lady go to jail?" Emma asked. "No, sweetie. She had to do community service and pay a fine, but she did not go to jail." "That is good. Jail is for really bad people." "Well, she did a bad thing, but that does not make her a really bad person. People make mistakes." "Did she say sorry?" "Eventually, yes. It took her a while, but she did apologize." "Did you forgive her?" I thought about that question. Had I forgiven Patricia? I was not sure. I had moved on, certainly. I was not angry anymore, but forgiveness felt like a strong word for how I felt. "I think so," I told Emma. "Or at least I am working on it." She nodded, satisfied with that answer, and went back to playing with her toys. The truth was that the whole experience had taught me a lot about justice, accountability, and the power of documentation. It had shown me that standing up to bullies, even when it felt risky, was often worth it. It had demonstrated that the internet, for all its flaws, could sometimes be a tool for holding powerful people accountable when traditional systems failed. It had also taught me that viral fame was exhausting, and I had no desire to experience it again. I was happy to fade back into anonymity, to be just another person in the neighborhood rather than the guy from the viral video. But I could not deny that the video had made a difference. Not just for me, but for my entire neighborhood and potentially for HOA reform efforts across the country. One security camera, one 90-second video, one moment of holding someone accountable, and everything changed. Years later, I could look back on the whole saga with a sense of peace. Justice had been served, not perfectly but adequately. Lives had been disrupted, yes, but ultimately people had landed in better places. The neighborhood was healthier. My life was good. Even Patricia, from what I could tell, had eventually found a path forward. The security footage of her climbing my gate would live forever on the internet, a permanent record of a moment of poor judgment. That was the price of living in the digital age. Actions that once would have been private disputes between neighbors could now become global news. That reality cut both ways, creating both opportunities for accountability and risks of disproportionate consequences. I thought I had struck the right balance. I had not doxed Patricia beyond what was already public information. I had not called for her to be fired or harassed. I had simply shown what she had done and let the chips fall where they may. The consequences that followed were a result of her actions and the judgments of others, not something I had orchestrated. As I sat in my home office one evening, now 5 years after the original incident, I pulled up the video one more time. It had over 15 million views at that point across all platforms. The comments were still active, with new people discovering it regularly and adding their own thoughts. I watched Patricia climb that fence again, struggling with her pantsuit, dropping down into my yard with that look of furtive determination. I watched her grab the de-icer bottles and climb back out. It still seemed absurd, even after all this time. The HOA president, the person who was supposed to be setting an example for the community, committing petty theft in broad daylight, but it had happened. I had the footage to prove it, and that footage had changed everything. I closed the video and shut down my computer. Tessa was calling me from downstairs. Dinner was ready. Emma was talking excitedly about something that had happened at school. Normal life, good life, the life I had fought to protect when I stood up to Patricia's tyranny. The de-icer incident was history now, a story I would tell at parties, a teaching moment for my daughter, a footnote in the ongoing saga of HOA reform in America. But it was no longer the defining feature of my life. I had moved on. We all had. And that, ultimately, was the best possible outcome. Justice served, lessons learned, life continuing forward. Sometimes standing up for yourself means the situation explodes in ways you never expected. But if you are standing up for what is right, if you are simply holding people accountable for their actions, then whatever happens next is something you can face with a clear conscience. I never regretted installing those security cameras. I never regretted posting that video. I never regretted standing up to Patricia Hendricks and her petty tyranny, because in the end, the neighborhood was better for it, and that was worth all the chaos and attention and stress that came along the way. The de-icer was long gone, but the lesson remained. Actions have consequences. Accountability matters. And sometimes, when you catch something on camera, you have an obligation to share it, no matter how uncomfortable that might be. That cold January morning 5 years ago had changed my life in ways I could never have predicted. But as I sat down to dinner with my wife and daughter, in our comfortable home in our pleasant neighborhood with its functional HOA, I knew that all of it had been worth it.